Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the chilling stories behind the most shocking crimes. In today's case, we dive into a twisted tale of obsession, love, and murder. Ethan Carter was an 18-year-old high school senior in the small town of Ridgewood. He had always been a quiet, intelligent student, but something changed when he entered his final year. His English teacher, Ms. Laura Bennett, was different from the others. At 38, she carried herself with grace and confidence, far removed from the immaturity of the teenagers she taught. Laura was known for her passion for literature and her ability to connect with students. Her lessons were more than just textbook exercises, they were invitations into a world of emotions, ideas, and perspectives. She spoke with enthusiasm, making even the most reluctant students listen. Ethan, an aspiring writer, found himself drawn to her. It started with admiration, then evolved into something deeper. At first, it was simple. He enjoyed her class more than any other, looked forward to each lesson, and felt a sense of importance whenever she praised his work. She encouraged him, told him he had talent, and that small bit of recognition was enough to make him feel special. She seemed to understand him in a way no one else did. He stayed after class more often, asking for feedback on his writing, eager to hear her thoughts. Their conversations stretched beyond assignments sometimes. They talked about classic literature, storytelling, and the power of words. She was patient and kind, listening attentively, offering thoughtful advice. The way she spoke made him feel valued, as if his thoughts mattered. Over time, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just admiration anymore. He started thinking about her outside of class, replaying their conversations, imagining scenarios where they talked for hours about books, life, and dreams. He wondered what she was like outside of school, what her personal life looked like beyond the walls of her classroom. Ethan began noticing the small things, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way she laughed softly when students made clever observations. He started watching her more closely, memorizing the way she moved, how she dressed, the perfume she wore. He told himself it wasn't wrong. It was just appreciation, respect for someone who had inspired him. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He lingered after class longer than necessary, inventing reasons to stay. He offered to help carry books, to assist in organizing papers. Every moment alone with her felt like a secret, something special only they shared. She was always professional, never giving him any reason to believe she saw him as anything more than a student. But in his mind, every smile, every moment of kindness became proof that she felt something too. When she complimented his writing, he took it as a sign. When she mentioned her love for poetry, he started writing verses just for her, though he never dared to share them. What Ethan didn't realize was how quickly admiration could turn into something dangerous. His thoughts became consumed by her, his emotions tangled in something he couldn't control. He was convinced their connection was real, something deeper than just a student-teacher relationship. And what he saw as fate was, in reality, a dangerous obsession growing in silence. As the school year progressed, Ethan's thoughts became consumed by Laura. What had started as admiration had turned into something much more intense. She was no longer just his favorite teacher, she was the center of his world. Everything she did fascinated him, from the way she explained literature to the way she absent-mindedly tapped her pen against the desk when she was thinking. He found himself constantly watching her, analyzing every detail, convinced there were hidden meanings in her gestures and words. He wanted to know everything about her. Searching for her online became a routine. He scrolled through her social media, memorizing the places she visited, the books she recommended, the music she liked. Every post felt like a glimpse into her personal world, one he desperately wanted to be a part of. When she mentioned her favorite coffee shop in passing during class, he started going there, hoping to run into her. He began walking by her house late at night, standing across the street, watching as lights flickered from inside. He imagined what she was doing, reading, writing, preparing lessons. These thoughts comforted him, making him feel closer to her, even though she had no idea he was there. His schoolwork, once a priority, no longer mattered. Assignments went unfinished, tests were ignored. His friends noticed the change, but he didn't care. They wouldn't understand. No one would. His parents asked why he seemed distant, but their concerns meant nothing to him. He was too focused on Laura. Then he found out about Daniel, a man she had never mentioned in class. Ethan had been staring at her profile for the 100th time when he saw a new post a picture of her with a tall, dark-haired man. The caption was simple, "My heart." The words made his stomach twist. He scrolled through the comments, reading congratulatory messages. That's when he saw it. Someone had asked when the wedding was, and she had replied next spring. It felt like a punch to the chest. His mind raced. She was engaged. She had been seeing someone all this time. Had she ever thought about Ethan the way he thought about her? Had she ever felt that connection? Or had he been fooling himself? The idea of her with someone else was unbearable. He imagined them together, sharing moments that he had dreamed of, and it filled him with rage. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. If she believed Daniel was the right man for her, she was wrong. She just needed to see the truth. He convinced himself that Daniel was the problem, the one standing in the way of what was meant to be. That night, he created a fake online account. He spent hours crafting the perfect message, choosing his words carefully. He found random photos of a man who looked similar to Daniel, ones that suggested he was with another woman. Then, with his hands shaking, he sent the message. He told Laura that her fiancé was unfaithful, attaching the photos as proof. He imagined how she would react, shocked, heartbroken, uncertain. The next day in class, she seemed normal. Too normal. He watched her closely, searching for any sign that she had read the message, that she was doubting Daniel. She smiled, she taught, she laughed with students. But Ethan noticed something. She seemed distracted. Her smile didn't last as long. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of worry. A seed had been planted. He just had to wait for it to grow. Laura's engagement continued, and Ethan became desperate. Every day felt like a battle between hope and reality. He watched her closely, searching for any sign that his message had worked, but nothing changed. She still wore the ring, still mentioned her fiancé in casual conversation, still lived in a world where Ethan didn't exist the way he wanted her to. It was unbearable. He had tried to show her the truth, but she refused to see it. His thoughts became darker. He imagined scenarios where Daniel was gone, erased from her life. He pictured Laura grieving, lost and vulnerable, turning to him for comfort. In his mind, this wasn't cruelty, it was fate correcting itself. She was meant to be with him. Daniel was an obstacle, nothing more. Every time he saw her, the frustration grew. He felt invisible, unimportant. He started skipping classes that weren't hers, wandering the halls or sitting in his car, replaying their past interactions. Every compliment she had ever given him, every kind glance, every shared moment, they weren't accidents. He convinced himself she had been trying to tell him something all along. She just needed to wake up. One afternoon, he followed her. She had stayed late at school, grading papers in her classroom, and when she left, he made sure she didn't see him. She drove to a bookstore in town, parked, and went inside. Ethan waited a few minutes before going in after her, keeping a safe distance. She was in the fiction section, browsing, completely unaware of his presence. He listened as she spoke to a friend, her voice light and happy. Then his heart sank. They were talking about wedding plans, dresses, venues, honeymoon destinations. She was excited. She wasn't hesitating, wasn't doubting anything. The message he had sent hadn't changed a thing. She was going to marry him. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he backed away, leaving the store before she could see him. He felt sick. His vision blurred with anger. It was like the world had betrayed him, like everything he had believed in was a lie. He had given her his heart, his devotion, and she had chosen someone else. That night he sat alone in his room, staring at a picture of her on his phone. It wasn't one she had posted, it was a photo he had taken secretly at school, capturing her mid-laugh as she spoke to another student. She looked beautiful, radiant. But now all he could see was the betrayal. His mind spiraled. He thought about all the times he had been there for her in ways no one else had. The late-night walks past her house, the carefully crafted messages, the way he had studied every detail of her life. He had done everything right, yet she still refused to see him. Something inside him snapped. The warmth he had once felt for her was gone, replaced by something cold and final. He had tried to be patient, to guide her toward the truth. But patience had failed. If he couldn't have her, no one would. On a rainy evening, Laura stayed late at school, grading papers in her empty classroom. The halls were silent, the last few teachers had already left, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional tapping of her pen against the desk. She was tired but determined to finish before heading home. Ethan knew this was his chance. He had been waiting for the perfect moment, and now it had arrived. He had watched her routine long enough to know that on certain evenings, she stayed behind to catch up on work. Tonight, no one else was around. No witnesses. No interruptions. Dressed in dark clothing, he moved through the empty halls, his footsteps soundless against the tiled floor. His heart pounded, not with fear but with certainty. This was what had to happen. He reached the classroom door and pushed it open. Laura looked up, startled to see someone there so late. She barely had time to react before he lunged forward, shutting the door behind him. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she registered the situation. He moved quickly, covering her mouth with one hand while the other raised the knife he had brought. She struggled, knocking over a stack of papers, her chair scraping against the floor in protest. She was stronger than he expected. She fought back, twisting in his grip, her hands clawing at him in a desperate attempt to break free. But he was prepared for this. He had played the moment over in his head too many times to let it slip away now. The blade met its mark. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her body jerking before weakening in his grasp. The fight drained from her as she collapsed to the floor, her breath shallow, eyes wide with shock. The red stain spread across her blouse, vivid against the pale fabric. She tried to speak, but no words came. Ethan stood over her, his own breath ragged, his hands shaking. This wasn't how he had imagined it. He thought he would feel powerful in control. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness. The reality of what he had done settled over him, suffocating and inescapable. The room was eerily silent now. The only sound the steady drip of blood onto the tile. The warmth of her presence, the kindness he had convinced himself was love, was gone. He had taken it from her. He knelt beside her, staring at her lifeless form. He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her that this was never supposed to be like this, but she wouldn't hear him. She would never hear him again. Panic set in. He looked around the room, searching for a way to undo what had just happened, but there was none. He had crossed a line that could never be erased. He needed to leave, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The weight of his own actions paralyzed him. Finally, he forced himself to move. He wiped the knife on his sleeve, shoved it into his pocket, and stumbled toward the door. He took one last look at Laura before slipping out into the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. But nothing could wash away what he had done. The next morning, the entire town was in shock. A beloved teacher was gone, and the police were hunting for answers. The school was closed, surrounded by flashing lights and yellow tape, as officers moved in and out of the building. Students and teachers gathered outside, their faces pale with disbelief. No one could understand how something like this had happened in their quiet town. Ethan watched it all unfold from his bedroom window, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. He had barely slept. His clothes from the night before were stuffed in a plastic bag under his bed, and the knife was wrapped in an old sweatshirt. He kept telling himself to stay calm, to act normal. But his mind raced with the memory of what he had done. He turned on the news, his heart pounding as the reporter spoke. The police were reviewing security footage, talking to witnesses, piecing together Laura's last moments. He swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about cameras. Had he been seen, had someone noticed him lurking in the halls? The thought sent a chill down his spine. By the afternoon, detectives had begun questioning students. They asked about Laura, her relationships, if she had any enemies. Ethan knew they would get to him eventually. He had spent so much time around her, always hanging back after class, always watching. Would they think it was strange? Would they suspect him? Then came the mistake, one he hadn't realized he had made. When the police searched Laura's home, they found something unexpected: her phone, still logged into her email. And in that inbox was the anonymous message he had sent about Daniel's supposed affair. The police traced the fake account, digging deeper into its origin. It didn't take long before it led them to Ethan. The knock on his door came just before sunset. 2 officers stood outside, their expressions unreadable. His mother answered, confusion turning to fear as they asked for Ethan by name. He tried to stay calm as they questioned him, but his voice wavered. They asked about Laura, about the message. He denied everything at first, but they had already gathered enough evidence to make him their prime suspect. A search warrant followed. They found the hidden photos, the letters he had never sent, the plastic bag under his bed. It was over. Within hours he was in handcuffs, his mother sobbing in the doorway as the officers led him away. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and Ethan's obsession was laid bare for the world to see. Prosecutors painted him as a disturbed young man who had convinced himself of a love that never existed. His defense argued insanity, but the jury saw through it. The verdict came quickly: guilty of first-degree murder. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he sat alone in his cell, he replayed their moments together, convincing himself that, in some twisted way, she was still with him. But the truth was simple: his love had never been real. It had only ever been an obsession, one that ended in tragedy. And in the end, Ethan lost everything: